Much ado about defense. Trudeau addresses NATO, a riot in Montreal, and your GST holiday on hold in the House. Another week begins. This is Now You Know on News Radio.
Going beyond the headlines.
Now You Know with Rob Snow on News Radio.
I'm David Smith, in for Rob Snow today on a Monday edition of Now You Know. Thank you for joining us at the beginning of another week. Lots of stories we're following for you today. Let's dive into it. Much ado about defense. Defense, global security, and spending on the military. These things are very much in focus for your federal leaders today. This weekend, politicians, military officials, top brass, and an army of lobbyists wrapped up the annual Halifax International Security Forum. The big story coming out of those meetings is that the Americans are losing patience with us. Our American allies, Donald Trump included, want Canada to spend more money on defense. NATO members are supposed to spend 2% of GDP on defense. Canada currently only spends about 1.3%. The Trudeau government has a plan to increase that to 2%, but not until 2032. U.S. Senator Jim Risch is the ranking member on the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He told reporters in Halifax that defense spending was one of his top concerns when it comes to Canada's defense partnership.
First of all, let me say that we come here to meet with our Canadian friends. They are one of our closest allies, clearly, our largest trading partner, and we come here to talk about the things that we agree on and how we can move forward on them. The Canadian people have values that mirror the values of the people of the United States of America. That's why we are such close allies. It is because of the people of both countries. Much to your chagrin, you will find that we agree on almost everything. We have disagreements, as friends do from time to time. They are de minimis in the overall scheme of things, and obviously we talk about those and how to work through them. The biggest one, of course, has been, and the one that gets the most attention, is the commitment of everyone who's a member of NATO to meet a spending level of 2% of GDP. Canada is not there. Out of the 32 countries, 23 are.
So that was Senator Risch under the TV lights in Halifax. On Sunday, he did a series of one-on-one interviews with Canadian media, and he made much stronger comments about Canada's defense spending. For example, Risch told Politico, quote, "I do not speak for the President-elect of the United States. If he were here in this room, you would get a very large guffaw from him on talking about 2032. It's gotta be better than that." End quote. A top Republican senator says Donald Trump would laugh out loud if he heard the Trudeau government's plan to meet our defense spending target. That's not what you want to hear. So Canada's defense minister is Bill Blair. He was asked about this by the media, of course.
Minister Blair, I know you're hearing about it. I just sat down with Senator Risch, a very powerful Republican from the United States, close friend of Donald Trump's. He says Donald Trump would laugh out loud at Canada's spending timeline to get to 2%. Coming out of this, do you think you need a more solid plan to get to 2% more quickly? And what are you telling the Prime Minister about that?
I have met with Senator Risch. I had a meeting with him earlier this morning, and many of the people here. And it's one of the great values of the Halifax International Security Forum and the attendance here of the CODEL is it gives us great opportunity to have these conversations. And I am able to assure him of Canada's absolute commitment. We know that we have to do more on defense, and we are going to spend more money. But I also asked for their help today, and I think there's a huge opportunity for the investments that Canada needs to make, not just in how much money we have to spend, but what the capabilities we have to invest in and acquire. That creates real opportunities for greater collaboration and partnership between Canada and the United States and all of our NATO allies.
Minister Blair doing his best to put a positive spin on this weekend's defense conference in Halifax. Sticking with news about NATO. That's the sound of a large demonstration that turned violent in Montreal An anti-NATO protest converged with a pro-Palestine demonstration on the streets outside the annual NATO summit, which was being held in downtown Montreal. Windows of the convention center and surrounding businesses were smashed, cars were set ablaze, and arrests were made. A firestorm of political criticism has been the result of that scene in Montreal. In a statement condemning the violence, Trudeau said, quote, "What we saw on the streets of Montreal last night was appalling. Acts of anti-Semitism, intimidation, and violence must be condemned wherever we see them. The RCMP are in communication with local police. There must be consequences and rioters held accountable." End quote. The Foreign Affairs Minister, Melanie Joly, who is from Montreal, added, quote, "Those who spread hate and anti-Semitism, urge violence, loot, and destroy property must be condemned and held accountable. Rioting is not peaceful protest and has no place in Montreal or anywhere in Canada." End quote. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre pinned the blame for the riot on Justin Trudeau. Poilievre posted his own lengthy statement, which reads in part, quote, "This is what happens when a prime minister spends 9 years pushing toxic, woke identity politics, dividing and subdividing people by race, gender, vaccine status, religion, region, age, wealth, etc. While you were dancing, Montreal was burning. We won't let you divide us anymore. Call an election now." End quote. That line about dancing in Poilievre's statement is in reference to the fact that the Prime Minister was attending the Taylor Swift concert in Toronto while this riot was taking place in Montreal. Today, Trudeau is in Montreal. He addressed the NATO summit a couple of hours ago. Montreal police say that about 800 people took part in this protest. About 20 to 40 people were allegedly responsible for the violence. Police expect more arrests will be made. This is Montreal Police Chief Fadi Daguerre.
Most of them goes very peacefully. Yesterday what happened, we had 3, 4, 5 different demonstrations. Honestly, most of them, 90% of them went really well. People, we were able to talk to them and it was made in a peaceful way. But at the end, we have a group that was organized. It wasn't there for the cause. It was there just to destroy the windows, the cars, and really they were there to do some criminal act. That we intervened with them. What you didn't see in the media is different intervention that we did before proactively. But in a few minutes, a few seconds, some others did some those criminal acts. Right now, we arrest 3 of them, and we're going to be arresting others because we have some details, investigation details on what they did on the field. And I'm very positive, very hopeful that in the next days, next weeks, we're going to be able to arrest those other groups.
And here in the nation's capital, MPs are back at it on Parliament Hill today. The big question we're all waiting on an answer to: how will the government actually pass legislation for the GST holiday? More on that coming up next with Cormac MacSweeney. I'm David Smith, in for Rob Snow today. This is Now You Know. This is News Radio.
Now You Know with Rob Snow continues on News Radio.
I'm David Smith, in for Rob Snow today. Thank you for joining us. Another political week begins here in the nation's capital. Members of Parliament are back to work for you in the House of Commons today. Although very little, if anything, is really getting done these days. The House of Commons has been paralyzed for weeks now as opposition parties continue to push for the release of documents related to Sustainable Development Technology Canada. That's the file the Conservatives have dubbed the Green Slush Fund. Debate continues on that today. I've lost track of how long it's been. It's been weeks. It's a marathon of procedural tactics by the opposition to stall the government's agenda. Why does any of that matter to you? Well, because that GST holiday and those rebate checks the government's promised last week, those can't happen unless the government passes some legislation. Let's bring in Cormac MacSweeney, our Parliament Hill Bureau Chief. Hi, Cormac.
Hello, David.
So talk us through this. What do we know about the legislation for the GST holiday and the rebate checks?
Well, it's kind of up in the air at the moment. We do have this privilege debate, and it's tying up everything, as you just mentioned. But the NDP, who supports this GST holiday and the rebate checks, although it says it would have done the rebate checks a little bit differently, but nonetheless, it is going to support the government in getting this passed. The problem is, the NDP is only agreeing to a one-day break. We don't know when that break is going to be to the privilege debate that's underway, and we know that the Conservatives probably have a lot of political and procedural tactics to try and make sure that they continue this privilege debate as long as possible. But the NDP is going to agree and side with the Liberals to try and take a break. Now, the Liberals could put forward a closure motion, which would have to be debated and voted on, and they could set a specific date out of that motion where they would take a break from all privilege matters in order to try and address this issue. But we'll have to wait and see how that all sort of shakes out and how this is going to work. One day to pass legislation, it is possible. You can put forward a motion in the House of Commons to bypass a lot of the regular checks and balances you would get on legislation and jam something through. It's not unheard of. It has been done before, but it is not usually done. And we'll see whether the Conservatives, who are intent on jamming up the agenda of the Trudeau government, if they have any tricks up their sleeves to cause more pain and prevent this from being passed, or whether the NDP and the Liberals can push this legislation through before December 14th. But the clock is ticking, and it'll be interesting to see whether the Liberals try and utilize this one-day break to do more than just get this GST passed, because there's also supplementary estimates that need to get passed so that spending can continue and the government can continue to function properly, as well as potentially the fall economic statement, which doesn't necessarily need legislation, but if it introduces new measures, it does. So we'll see whether that's going to be maybe a lumped-up omnibus bill, or whether it's just going to be the GST cut, maybe also the supplementary estimates. There are a lot of questions about how this is going to shake out.
Yeah. It is possible that legislation can be passed expeditiously. It does happen. Usually not when we have a fractious parliament situation like we have currently. And it's not just the GST holiday and the rebate checks, these recent goodies that we've heard about. There's other stuff that's on hold right now in the House of Commons, right, Cormac? Some pretty major things that the government wants to get passed through to deliver on its agenda before the holidays. What else is being held up right now?
Yeah, we're talking about the supplementary estimates, which of course gives the government the power to continue spending, whether or not we have budgets in place or not. But we need to get that passed in order to continue government spending on key promises and programs that are in place. You're talking about daycare, dental care, et cetera. So that's going to be very important. There are questions if that doesn't get passed, how we could function moving forward. So we'll see whether that gets passed or not through this. And we already mentioned the fall economic statement, but of course there are changes to election law, Citizenship Act stuff. And then, of course, that big debate that we had at the start of the fall that hasn't yet come to a vote, the capital gains tax inclusion rate. That still needs to come to a vote in the House of Commons. It would be a confidence matter as well when that comes through. So we'll have to wait and see what happens with that, whether we'll get any votes aside from this single day before this fall session ends, or whether we'll have to wait for the new year to get a lot of that stuff passed.
Yeah, lots to do and only 2 weeks to do it in. Doesn't look good for the Liberals there. Before I let you go, Cormac, on the GST holiday and the rebates, what kind of reaction are you hearing? I know you've got your ear to the ground. What's the reaction been like to that policy announcement?
Yeah, I think in liberal circles, there's some excitement that they could sell this at the doorstep to Canadians, that this could help with liberal fortunes, which have been on the downslide for a long time. However, there are people who are kind of scratching their heads why this is even needed at this moment. Our economy is not at a state where stimulus spending, such as these rebate checks, are really warranted or needed at this time. The GST cut and the rebates will be popular decisions when Canadians see see that cash in their bank account or see their bills with Christmas spending go down a little bit. However, I've been speaking with some experts, including former Parliamentary Budget Officer Kevin Page, who doesn't believe that this is needed, and it could actually have impacts on the government's budget moving forward when we get that spring budget, which is supposed to be a pre-election budget, and the commitment from the feds to reach their fiscal targets. And some people believe that this is just a purely political move. And I encourage listeners to listen to the Big Story podcast tomorrow, because we're going to be talking a lot more about that and the impacts that this GST cut could have.
Yes, that should be a good conversation. I'll be tuning into that tomorrow on the Big Story podcast. All right, Cormac, we will let you go for today. Thank you for your time.
Anytime.
That's Cormac MacSweeney. He's our Parliament Hill Bureau Chief, also filling in on the Big Story podcast tomorrow. If you listen to the Big Story podcast today, you may hear a familiar voice. I was filling in on the Big Story today. I had a really interesting conversation about immigration. All of that can be found on the Seeker app, by the way, S-E-E-K-R, Seeker, S-E-E-K-R. Great new listening experience that we have for you. Podcasts, radio, all in one place. It's excellent. You should really check that out. I'm David Smith. In for Rob Snow today. This is Now You Know. On a Monday, we're just getting going. A short break here. We'll be back right after this. This is News Radio.
Now You Know with Rob Snow continues on News Radio.
It's David Smith here. In for Rob today. Rob will be back tomorrow. Don't worry. I know it's that time of year. Nothing has happened. He just took the day off. He will be back tomorrow, I promise. I'm in for you today. You're stuck with me. Lots is still coming up here on the show. We're just getting to the bottom of the hour, get the news on. Then we'll have the Newsday panel, as we always do. Some excellent strategists will join us. We're going to talk about restricting protest, which is a topic I want to get into with you on Talkback later in the day as well. 2 major cities in Ontario have now passed bylaws to restrict protest. Now, I can appreciate we've had a tremendously turbulent year with lots of disruptive and at times illegal protest activity in Canadian cities. I get that. But I do question the wisdom of local municipal councils curtailing fundamental freedoms in this country. And I'm not exaggerating when I phrase it like that. The right to protest, the right to peaceful assembly is a charter-protected right. I'm very hesitant to jump on board with carte blanche restrictions on fundamental freedoms, regardless of what the issue is. A quick update on NATO. We were talking about NATO a little bit earlier this hour as well, because some American senators over the weekend were up here in Halifax for the big defense conference they do down there every year, and they didn't have anything kind to say about Canada's defense spending. Some very pointed words saying that the Trudeau government's path to get to 2% of GDP spent on defense by 2032 simply is not good enough. Justin Trudeau is defending his spending record on the military amid fresh criticisms Canada's failing to live up to our defense spending commitments. Trudeau addressed the NATO conference in Montreal a couple of hours ago, and he says Canada is now on a quote-unquote clear path to spend the equivalent of 2% GDP on defense by 2032. He continues to defend the same plan that our American friends are criticizing. Bit of a stalemate there. That's the defense file. Very busy on that file today after this weekend's NATO Summit and Defense Conference in Halifax. I'm David Smith. You're listening to Now You Know on News Radio. We'll be back after the news with the Newsday panel. Don't go anywhere.
There is no question Rob won't get answered.
Now You Know with Rob Snow continues
On News Radio, the Newsday panel.
Yes, it is. David Smith here in for Rob today. Joining me on the Monday Newsday panel, we have Chris Day, President Winston Wilmot. Hello, Chris.
Hello, sir.
How are you?
Well, thanks.
Good. Jordan Paquette is here as well, Senior Consultant, Blue Sky Strategy Group. Hello, Jordan.
Hello, David. Hello, Chris.
Good weekends? Good weekends?
Great weekend. I was in Montreal this weekend.
Oh, you were? What were you doing on Friday night, Chris?
Trying to avoid police blockade.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's interesting that you were down there, so let's dive right into that. Restricting protest. Here's how I'm coming at that story today. Restricting protest is back up as a topic of discussion, I think, because of what we saw in Montreal, and more importantly, how we saw some politicians react to it. I think this idea that the government needs to step in and do something about these protests is catching on. It's gaining momentum. So I would put to you, Chris, is it a good idea for politicians to pass laws restricting protest in Canada? This weekend in Montreal, we saw cars set on fire, we saw windows smashed, we saw people arrested. 2 major cities in Ontario have already passed bylaws to restrict where protests can happen after violent demonstrations in this province. Earlier in the fall, city councils in other cities are discussing it, including here in the nation's capital. Chris, what are your thoughts on politicians restricting the right to protest?
Well, so there are already a series of laws on the books that deal with this very question. I do think that there is some wisdom in making clear that places of worship and schools and daycares and those types of facilities that have become the subject of these sort of bubble bylaws are not, places that ought to be targeted. But in terms of balancing the right to free speech and the right to protest with public safety and other needs, I think we have a long history of doing that fairly well in this country. And I don't know that a whole series of new laws are needed. But when people feel unsafe going into whether it's a mosque or a synagogue or whatever, a gurdwara or whatever the case may be, because of protests, then maybe there's something more that's needed.
Yeah, I said this before the break a few minutes ago. I can appreciate there's a tremendous amount of pressure on these politicians, especially local politicians, to do something. People feel unsafe or just plain annoyed about the disruption in their communities. But at the same time, I'm very wary of any political interference with civil liberties in this country. We just went through a period in the pandemic where there was far too much of that going on, and it became untenable very quickly. To me, this is a law enforcement issue. Passing new laws to deal with a problem we already have laws for is more about politics than anything else. Jordan, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would agree with that, and everyone has a job to do here. At the end of the day, I do agree with you, David, that politicians shouldn't necessarily get into policing what people say and do. They should be ready to widely condemn abhorrent behavior, especially what we saw last Friday in Montreal. People going around to Jews saying the final solution's coming, smashing windows and damaging private property. But police do have a job to do, and laws are on the books in many of these certain circumstances, as Chris mentioned. And police just really have to enforce the law. You have an absolute right to go out and protest and make your voice heard, peacefully. But when you start trespassing in private property, when you start smashing businesses and setting fires, that completely goes way beyond the right of just a peaceful protest and the right of free speech. So I think that balance has been quite clear throughout much of our history, and it's just a matter of enforcing what laws are on the books.
Okay. All right. Sounds like we are broadly in agreement on that file. Very good. On to our next issue of business. Is it really fair to criticize Justin Trudeau for going to a concert the same night that there happened to be a violent protest in Montreal? On Friday, Trudeau was at the Taylor Swift concert in Toronto, and he's being viciously attacked online, including by members of the official opposition, including by Pierre Poilievre, for he happened to be there while this was happening in Montreal. Is that fair to criticize him for that, Chris?
So, I think every politician, every parent in the country probably wanted to take their kids to Taylor Swift the last few days. Timing, right? Events, as they say, right? Yeah. I think it would be unfair for him to be criticized for not having the foresight to expect a very violent protest while he was at the concert.
Okay.
And I also think it's fair to criticize his dancing moves. However, I do think that, once the news started rolling in that Montreal was indeed burning, visuals of him dancing, not a good look. And so I think it's fair to criticize. The Prime Minister needs to be on the job all the time, and dancing while your city burns, not a great look.
Yeah, I'm not usually one to defend the Prime Minister. I think this was more about unfortunate timing than it was any kind of lack of leadership on Mr. Trudeau's fault. Maybe, Chris, to your point, maybe somebody in his team dropped the ball, not anticipating there may be images of a riot at the same time there are images of Trudeau dancing at the Taylor Swift concert. Fine. But Jordan, I don't know. To me, it's like criticizing the mayor for not showing up to every fire. Like, what is Justin Trudeau supposed to do if there's a riot in Montreal? What do you think?
Yeah, a couple things. In general, I'm not going to criticize the Prime Minister for taking his daughter to a concert. Like Chris said, I think these were very sought after. Every dad in Canada would have wanted to take their daughter here. And he still has to be a dad at the end of the day. But at the same time, the government has been quite terrible in this issue from the start. And I'm not saying that he should have been there looking at his phone. But you're right. Perhaps a team member could have said, hey, PM, there's some stuff happening in Montreal. Maybe we can get a statement out soon. He's been very slow on this issue to issue statements calm the nation whenever these incidents happen. I don't think he came out until late the next morning. So he's already been criticized, and he has an image problem on some of these issues. But I think what some of this reminds Canadians of is just going back to the Prime Minister's broader judgment when certain timing of some of these events happen. For example, the first Truth and Reconciliation Day, he was out surfing in Kelowna. So I think in order to be taken seriously again by Canadians, his team's really going to have to sort of step up what situations that they're seen to be putting him in. And that's not to say he shouldn't still be a dad and be out there in public and having fun with his kids. But it's also about balancing his responsibility as Prime Minister and to be taken seriously as a world leader when some of these issues are coming up.
No, it's true. It's a good point you raised, Jordan. If the Prime Minister did not already have baggage on that issue, it may be a different story today.
Yeah.
But he has a lot of baggage on not being where he's supposed to be at the right time, and that's entirely his fault. All right, very interesting. We have to stop here. Short break. Lots more still to get to with our panelists, Chris Day and Jordan Paquette. I am David Smith, in for Rob Snow today. We're back right after this on News Radio.
You have questions.
Now you know with Rob Snow has the answers.
On News Radio.
Yes, it's David Smith here in for Rob Snow today. Thank you for joining us. We're in the middle of our Newsday panel. Chris Day is here with Winston Wilmot, Jordan Paquette with Blue Sky Strategy Group. So let's get back to this GST holiday $250 rebate scheme that the Trudeau government announced on Friday of last week. The Trudeau, we're being serious about this, okay? I'm not laughing. The Trudeau government is defending its $250 rebate and GST holiday as a, quote, targeted economic policy. Chris, what do you think about that claim that this is a highly sophisticated and targeted government policy? What do you think?
It is targeted at getting people to pay attention to them again. It is targeted at reaching as many people as possible. And it is targeted at a lot of folks who are really having trouble paying the bills right now. But that's the only way in which it is targeted. This is a very, very broad-based thing. Deliberately, I think they should own that. Where the interesting pieces of the last few days for me have been is that it doesn't cover, for instance, students who haven't worked. It doesn't cover seniors who who are in retirement age. So, I think their targeting may be a little off, and I think it may come back to bite them because some of the folks that need this help the most won't be getting it.
Yeah. And seriously, though, the income cutoff being $150,000 of net income, The idea that a two-income household at $150,000, $300,000 taxable income needs help from the government is laughable. Let's just be honest about that. That's laughable. I'm not saying that people who make that kind of money, who maybe have a big house and a high mortgage payment, I'm not saying they're not stressed for cash, but they don't need help from the government. Not before we've been able to help people with disabilities, people living on the streets, etc.
They do need help. I mean, in terms of paying lower interest rates, they do need help.
Sure.
And those are things the government could actually do something about with, a bit more of a coherent fiscal policy, for instance. The $250 is just going to be added to the deficit and going to cost us all in the long run. That's not the kind of help that those families need, for sure.
The other thing I know about the demographic pulling in $150,000 a year is that there are a lot of them who live in the suburbs in Toronto who have crippling mortgage payments on overpriced houses who want to find a reason to vote for the Liberal Party. Jordan, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't think someone in that particular situation is going to switch their vote suddenly. I mean, and this is a targeted measure targeted towards voters, and that's it. Look, as a conservative, I'm not going to typically complain about cutting taxes, but temporary measures like this are just crass political moves. This is not going to do any long-term economic growth. It's not going to do something, as Chris mentioned, about putting people in a position to better afford mortgage payments with lower interest rates, things government can actually do. This is just a temporary political win that the government's looking for that's going to be extremely expensive heading into an election year. So, I mean, I think, waking up in the new year, okay, great, it's 2025 now, we're heading into an election soon. Here's a little GST holiday that the government just gave you. It's so crass in the politics of it that that I think most Canadians at this point of where this government is are going to completely see through it. The government is responsible for a lot of affordability issues that are happening right now. They could just go out and cut red tape, cut regulations. They could cut the carbon tax, but they're hanging on to all these different policies and just instead trying to offer people some temporary little Christmas gift that I don't think will work out in the long term for the government or for Canadians for that matter.
Okay, I want to harp on this just for one more minute, if you'll indulge me. The Trudeau sent a cabinet minister out to be the face on this file for the weekend cable TV shows. It was Marcy Ian, the Minister of Youth, amongst other things. Youth unemployment in Canada is at a 10-year high. Youth unemployment in Canada, for the last decade, it has never been harder for a young person to find a job in this country. So Marcy Ian was on CTV this weekend. Vashi Kapelos asked her about why students are excluded from this. And she said, quote, if those families are saving money, if they're saving money at the grocery store under this tax break, this holiday tax break, if they are saving money when it comes to the buying of Christmas presents and making sure that families can come together and save money in doing so, then entire families benefit. End quote. That is an exact quote. That's the best she could come up with to answer that question. Chris, as an example of government communications, what do you think about that quote from Marcy Ian?
Well, with all due respect to my former CTV colleague, political communications have not been her strong suit, and I think this is the most recent example of that. You're sent out to answer some tough questions sometimes. This is a totally foreseeable question, and I don't think they have a better answer than that. Ultimately, she's sent out to put a face on a policy that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, and trying to dance around that is not fun. So I have some sympathy for that. But you're still putting lipstick on a pig proverbially.
Yeah. Okay, we have to stop here for a very short break. We'll get back. Another really interesting story to talk about coming up. Just to tie a bow on that one with the rebates, if there are any young people out there listening who are struggling, who can't find a job, just know the Trudeau government's message to you is that we gave your parents a tax break. Go ask them for some money. I'm David Smith in for Rob Snow. This is Now You Know. This is News Radio.
No question goes unasked or unanswered.
Now You Know with Rob Snow returns on News Radio.
David Smith in for Rob Snow today. This is the Newsday panel. Chris Day is here along with Jordan Paquette. Really interesting story I read about in the National Post on the weekend. Canada has a brand new federal political party. I didn't know that. So this party has been started by a fella named Dominic Cardy, who I gather used to be a minister in the PC government in New Brunswick. I don't know this guy at all. Jordan, you're from that part of the country. You probably know him more than I do. I think him aside, Dominic Cardy aside, I think the idea is interesting. He says his idea behind this new party is the middle. Be a centrist party, be an option for Canadians who think the Conservatives are too conservative and who think the Liberals are too liberal. So, Jordan, I'll start with you on this one. What do you think about this idea? Is there fertile ground for a centrist party in Canada?
Not with how this is currently structured, no. I mean, Dominic Cardy was also the former NDP leader in New Brunswick, so I think he just kind of jumps around to whatever particular project suits. I mean, this is no offense to some of the people that I know who actually put in some effort to get this launched. They're all great people, some of the ones working behind the scenes, but it seems like a kind of a short-term vanity project. Inside both the Conservative and Liberal parties, there's always been...
Uh-oh. That doesn't sound good. Jordan, are you still there?
Yeah, am I back?
Jordan?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we lost Chris, but we have you, Jordan.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Please,
I'll continue on with my little rant here
continue.
for a second then. So, no, I mean, look, inside both of the main parties now, there's enough centrist, pragmatic people involved. Some of the people that were involved in this future party before have previously tried to run for Conservative leader, didn't get much traction there, so it's like kind of they want to pick up their marbles and go start their own club. Totally fine. They have every right to do that. I just have always believed that you're much better off advocating for policies inside of the system that's there. And if you can't, through whatever reason, convince people through your own leadership aspirations, appealing through your policies, it's not gonna. You're not going to be able to convince any other Canadians of it. So I think this will be a short-term project. I don't think they're going to be able to attract much money or have a full slate of candidates anywhere.
Okay, we do have Chris back, so a super quick comment from you, Chris. Is there room in the mushy middle for a centrist political party? 30 seconds.
Well, so there is, and the Liberals used to occupy it.
Right.
It was why they were known for many years as the sort of natural governing party. I think this is really more of an indication that they've shifted very much to the left than anything else. And, Mr. Cardy may be trying to tap into that. As Jordan said, there's some good people around him.
Yeah.
If he makes a go of it, then it could be interesting.
Okay, very interesting. Gotta run. Thank you both. Jordan Paquette, Blue Sky, Chris Day, Winston Wilmont. This is News Radio.
It's time to talk back.
On Now You Know with Rob Snow.
Call now.
And have your say.
1-833-668-2577.
Let's get it going. It's Talkback here on News Radio. Phone lines are open now at 1-833-668-2577. That's 1-833-668-2577. That's the number to call. If you're new around here, we'd love to hear from you. Phone lines are open now. We're standing by. Give us a call. Get on the air. Have your say. Let the country know how you're feeling about the big issues of the day. I'm David Smith. I'm in for Rob Snow today to keep you company on the show on this fine Monday. Rob will be back tomorrow. Don't worry. I know it's that time of year. Nothing's happened. He just took the day off. He will be back tomorrow, I promise. So let's get into it. Since it's Monday, and there are so many different things happening in the news today, I'm going to keep it fairly wide open on topics for the talk back today. I'm good to talk about pretty much anything that's been in the news. Just give us a call, let Andrea know what you want to talk about, and we'll talk about it. But I do have a few stories I'd like to highlight. Some issues that I think demand our attention here on the show today. Protests. Yes, it's been a record year of protests across Canada. Lots of attention on the pro-Palestine protest movement, of course. There's also been the Khalistan movement and its opponents, garnered a lot of attention. There's been a great deal of debate among politicians and leaders in various communities at all levels about the impact that protests have on the communities that they take place in. Whether that be targeted illegal harassment by protest groups, riot behavior like we saw in Montreal, or just general disturbances, traffic disruptions, noise complaints, etc. So a question to you from me to discuss on the airwaves today. When is it appropriate for the government to restrict people's right to protest? 1-833-668-2577. For example, in Brampton, Ontario, okay, big city, part of the GTA, Brampton, Ontario, the city council has passed a bylaw that makes it illegal to protest in certain places in the city. The bylaw is targeted at places of worship. The council took this action in the wake of violence that erupted between Hindu nationalists and Khalistani separatists, Indian diaspora groups. They had a series of incidents, violence, damage, destruction, etc. In response to those violent protests that were targeting places of worship in Brampton, the city council passed a bylaw. And the bylaw bans protesting within 100 meters of the property line of any place of worship in Brampton that in any way would, quote, cause a reasonable person to be intimidated, meaning that they are either concerned for their safety or security, or they are unable to access any place of worship. Is that reasonable to you? A municipal government curtailing the charter right to freedom of assembly. 1-833-668-2577. Not everybody is on board with that. For example, the Canadian Civil Liberties Association issued a letter to the mayor and council opposing the bylaw in Brampton. They say, as currently drafted, the proposed bylaw is likely to chill free speech and lawful peaceful protests. They say this bylaw uses vague and open-ended definitions that leave it to police officers to make subjective and unpredictable determinations. Any person guilty of an offense under this bylaw is subject to a maximum fine of $100,000. A municipal fine of $100,000. The Civil Liberties Association calls that irrational and disproportionate. And it's not just in Brampton. Other cities have talked about doing this as well. Here in your nation's capital, the local city council is studying it right now. This past weekend, we saw another pro-Palestine protest that resulted in arrests here in the nation's capital, which is a problem. I'm not saying that's not a problem, especially when it's been going on weekend after weekend for a year now. But do we really want to go down the road of carving up no protest zones in public spaces in this country? It makes me uncomfortable. I feel uneasy putting up my hand and saying, absolutely, we need the government to restrict protests in this country. What do you think? 1-833-668-2577. Would really welcome your thoughts on that issue. Another question for you to consider today at 1-833-668-2577. Do you feel like a political orphan? All alone in the political wilderness with no one to turn to? If you don't really identify with any of Canada's federal political parties right now, you're not alone. A recent Angus Reid poll found 1 in 3 Canadians say they are a political orphan. They don't connect with any of the 3 major parties. A lot of Canadians say they think the Liberals are too left-wing, and the Conservatives are too right-wing, and there's nobody to represent them in the middle. The reason I bring this up today is because Canada now has a brand new federal political party. I did not know about this. They had their first ever convention a couple of weeks ago, and there was a big write-up in the National Post on Sunday about it. Yes, I still read the newspaper on Sunday. It's called the Canada Future Party, and the leader says it has a simple mission, and that mission is the middle. Retake the middle of the political spectrum in Canada, a centrist party for centrist Canadians. What do you think about that? Do you think Canada needs a new federal party in the middle? Left of the Conservatives, but right of the Liberals. Are you looking for a party that's more conservative than the Liberals, but more liberal than the Conservatives? I'd love to hear from you. Just let me know why. 1-833-668-2577. I'm David Smith. We'll take a short break here. Your calls on the other side. This is Talkback on News Radio.
Have something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talkback on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
Yeah, David Smith here in for Rob today. Rob will be back tomorrow. Thank you for joining us. It's Talkback. Phone lines have filled up quite quickly here, so let's get right to it. A couple of topics that we're digging into today. Restricting the right to protest. A couple of major cities here in the province of Ontario have taken action to restrict where you can have a protest because of unrest and violence and illegal activity happening at protests. I'm uneasy with that. I am skeptical anytime the government wants to curtail fundamental freedoms in response to a short-term political issue. At the same time, I understand there's a lot of pressure on them to act. And on the federal politics front, do you feel like a political orphan? Do you wish there was a party somewhere between the Conservatives on the right and the Liberals on the left, a centrist party? Because a former cabinet minister from New Brunswick has started one. It's called the Canadian Future Party, just in time for the next election. 1-833-668-2577. Up first on the phones, we have Peter in Halifax. Hi, Peter.
Thanks for taking my call. See, here in Halifax, we're going to have a very low turnout, as we always do. And that is because the vast majority of voters don't have a party which they can attach themselves to. They're all basically promising the same things. None of their promises come true. None of them. And if you were to complain about it too much, too strenuously, you'll get shut down from any complaints on whatever Twitter feed or Facebook or whatever else. You might even get a visit from the police.
What do you mean, get a visit from the police?
Oh, it's happened. Believe me, it's happened to me. And it's just stating an opinion. And as far as the protests go, you know, a lot of those people protesting are probably seeing their own countries being demolished by NATO, such as Libya, such as Iraq, such as Syria. And NATO is famous for inciting violent demonstrations.
Yeah, your opinion on NATO is not interesting to me, Peter. I want to know if you think that the government here in Canada should restrict protests because they are frequently, and more frequently it seems, getting out of hand.
And a lot of those protests that get out of hand, and this has been proven, are state actors who foment the violence.
Well, it's a big problem these days.
Well, yes,
right?
Because state actors...
Agitators, you know?
Yes, paid by our government to foment...
Paid by our government? No.
Of course.
Paid by the Russian government, surely.
Oh, please. What? Look, this is so ridiculous, this Russia thing. Listen, and a lot of these people are protesting, and I would protest, because some of us realize that missiles fly both ways. Okay? Submarines can travel both directions.
Yes. Okay.
And here in Halifax, I am what would be known as a human shield.
All right. I got to let you go, Peter. And, if you wanted to call a little less frequently, I'd be fine with that. You're always all over the place, Peter. Real simple question. If your city council wanted to restrict where you can hold a protest, would you be in favor of that, or would you have some concerns about it? I have concerns about it. 1-833-668-2577. Up to Sean, who's from Halifax. Hello, Sean.
Hey there. How are you?
I'm doing fine. What's your take on this one?
So, if we have the freedom to practice religion and we have the freedom to get educated, we should have the freedom to do it without protest. If all they're saying is no protests allowed where religion is being practiced and no protests allowed where children are being educated, I'm in full support of that. There is no reason that protesters have the need to disrupt people's right to practice religion. I remember in the 90s, I think it was, there was a pop-up of satanic churches, and they tried to protest those. And they avoided those protests by saying we have the freedom to practice our religion. I'm not saying I'm not in support of Satanism or anything like that. I'm just saying that if you have the freedom to practice religion, you have the freedom to practice it in a peaceful manner and without someone else coming in and ruining your whole life about it. And same with education. Shooting up schools? That's insane. What country do we live in where that's tolerated and considered a right of protest?
And I hear you, Sean. I hear you. I do. But where I'm coming at this from is those things are already illegal. It's already illegal to barricade the front of a church and prevent people from going into worship. That's illegal. That's criminal harassment. Do we need another law on top of that?
It's not about barricading the front of a church. It's about standing across the street from the church all day and intimidating the people in the church.
Right.
Could you imagine if you're going to midnight mass and there's a protest across the street on midnight mass? Come on. You got to let people have the freedom to practice religion. And if that means that we need a restriction of how far protesters can be in front of schools and religious places of worship, absolutely. I'm all for the freedom to protest.
Okay. So as long as it's restricted to those two things.
We haven't seen organized peaceful protests. We've seen radicalized protests that cause property damage, intimidation, and are spreading hate.
Yeah. Again, it is illegal to spread hate already. What we don't have is a geographic restriction on it.
We're not enforcing it.
Yeah.
We're not enforcing it. And that's a bigger problem.
But in terms of new restriction, the restriction is placed upon your right to expression and your right to assembly, so long as you're not professing hate. That's a restriction we already have on that fundamental freedom. For you, Sean, if the new restriction was targeted specifically to schools and places of worship, that's reasonable to you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, I have to run for the break. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the call, Sean. Interesting. All right, 1-833-668-2577. We're off and rolling here. Again, our topics are restricting the right to protest and a centrist political party in Canada. A former cabinet minister from New Brunswick has launched a new federal political party right in time for the next federal election. He says it's all about taking back the center of the political spectrum. What do you think about that? 1-833-668-2577. This is Talkback on News Radio.
Have something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talkback on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
It's David Smith here in for Rob with you today. Let's get right back to the phones. Up next is Mike in Halifax. Thank you for waiting, Mike. You're on the air.
How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good.
That's good. As far as the protesting goes, the only one I don't like is the ones with the hate going on, protesting, against Israel and Jewish people.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want them interfering with our rights to protest too much.
Okay.
But in a topic like that really affects me. Orphan.
Political orphan, yeah, a new centrist party for federal politics. What do you think of that?
Well, you know what? I like that because we just had a municipal election. We're sitting here tomorrow going to have a provincial election. And I didn't vote yet the last one, and I'm not going to vote in this one. I spoke with a couple of people that represent my area, and it's just, I feel like an orphan, and I feel very disrespected. And I've even spoke with Pierre Poilievre when he was in town at one of the town halls. And my issue just doesn't seem to be on the radar. I turned 65 last November, and the amount of money I was asked to live on was $1,300 a month.
Yeah.
Now, in July, that was bumped up $300 big dollars because of how low I was actually living on. And, I just feel like there's no conversation. There's no, you hear a lot of conversations about affordable housing, but you don't see it. You don't, every time people, it's just like one of those buzzwords or buzz phrases that they fire around. And you'd really, there's a building that they're doing here just down the road from where I live. It's going to be 18 units, and they've got 9 that are going to be affordable housing and 9 at the regular rates of rentals.
Which is, fine, but it's a drop in the bucket, right?
Exactly, yeah.
And you feel, Mike, because we're running up to the break, but Mike, you feel you don't have a home with the conservatives or the liberals. You feel like an orphan.
The Green, any of them. Like, it's just, there's just nobody supporting the seniors, people on disability, like the amounts of money that some people in this country, and being a person that's been around over 6 decades, I feel like I've contributed. I feel very disrespected.
I hate to cut you off, Mike, but we're right up against it. Thank you for your call, as always.
All right.
Have something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talkback on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
David Smith here, in for Rob today. Thank you for joining us. Busy on the phones to start the week here. A couple of topics. One of them, do you feel like a political orphan? Are you looking for a party that's more conservative than the liberals, but more liberal than the conservatives? I'd love to hear from you. Why do you feel that way? Is it Poilievre? Is it Trudeau? Is it the policies? If you don't feel at home supporting the liberals or the conservatives, would you welcome a third option somewhere in the middle of the political spectrum? Back to the phones we go. Paul in Cambridge. Thanks for waiting. Hi, Paul.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing fine. What's your take?
Yeah. Well, first off, I'd like to say people throw out this right wing as if it's a bad thing. That's the accusation. Oh, they're right wings, they're right wing, they're right wing. You talk about a centrist party. No such thing. As we stand right now, people accuse the conservatives of being right wing when they're actually more of a centrist party. It's just that the liberals have driven things so far to the left, they've moved the center line on the football field.
Okay.
Conservatives are centralists. Okay? So anybody that's going to come in is going to be left of center because the conservatives are already in the center. There's a political theory, and I can't remember the guy's name that wrote it, but one of his, he had 3 rules, and one of the rules was that any party that is not steering to the right will eventually drift left. A famous guy, I can't remember his name offhand, but that's the way it works.
Right, I hear what you're saying, yeah.
The right wing is not an insult. I'm a proud conservative. I lean right, if you want to call it that, but I would still say that the Conservative Party is a centralist party. It's just that the Liberals are so far to the left that you don't know where the center is anymore.
Right. Okay. I hear you. Thank you for the call, Paul. Interesting thoughts.
My view on protest?
Oh, sure. Yeah, if you have some thoughts on that, please. Yeah.
Okay. How about this? I don't know if you're old enough to know about this. How about when the neo-fascists marched through Skokie, Illinois? Should we allow things like that? Should some neo-fascist party be allowed to protest outside of a synagogue?
Well, I would just, again, remind people that if your purpose of your protest is to espouse hate, we have hate speech laws. That's already an illegal protest. Do we need to further place more restrictions on the location of a protest, for example, outside of school or outside of a church?
If we have laws against hate speech, how does from the river to the sea fit in there? Should that not be prosecuted under hate crime?
Well, there's an ongoing legal debate about that phrase, whether or not that constitutes hate speech.
Is it only hate if it's right-wing against somebody, or is it still hate if it's left-wing against a religious or national group? Somebody's got to make the decision. Hate is hate.
Right.
You can't say it's okay. Well, we agree with this left-wing guy, so that's okay. But we disagree with the right-wing guy, so we're going to prosecute them under hate laws.
Yep.
It's got to be an even playing field. There's got to be a center there. And like I said, like everything else, the left has pushed things so far to the left that the center is almost left. And like I say, any conservative party, any so-called right-wing party, if they are not steering to the right, they will drift to the left.
Okay, I've got you down, Paul.
The easiest flow.
I've got you down. I want to move along to another caller. Thank you, though. Thank you. Good thoughts today. Yes, a couple heavy-duty topics. I don't profess to have all of the answers. On the middle of the Canadian political spectrum, on Paul's point that anything not steering right will be pulled left in this country, just some public opinion research to share with you. Angus Reid looked at this a couple months ago. 43% of Canadians polled believe the Liberal Party has moved left. 48% say the Conservative Party has moved to the right. So pretty similar proportions of people suggest that both of those parties are heading in opposite directions. 1-833-668-2577. Up next on the phones is Tom in Cambridge. Hi, Tom.
How you doing? I think with the protesters first, I think where's the accountability lie with those, first of all, applying for a permit to protest? I think the convoy process should be the example. Whereas that if you're going to have a protest, but under the disguise to disrupt anybody's religion or way of life, these things should be taken into consideration as well. There is the accountability factor here. I believe that everybody has a right to protest as long as it doesn't infringe on anybody else's rights or freedoms, to that extent. Once you start imposing your thoughts and imposing your will on certain things where it disrupts someone's way of practicing their religion or a way of life or a business and that, then we walk down another slippery road because then you want a government to come in and impose something else again. So maybe if you have a protest and something becomes, as you have disruptors in that protest, you don't get a permit to protest anymore for a long time. Maybe there should be, what financial restitution can be brought about on those people.
Right. Okay. So if you're a group, let's say you plan a protest and you're the organizers of the protest and you claim people came in and disrupted your protest, which otherwise would have been peaceful. As the people who arranged for the permit to close the road, for example, you have some accountability for what the people who come and join you on the road do.
Yeah, exactly. Huh. There's no complicity there. If you're asking people to come join your protest and all of a sudden there may be some infiltrators and there are some disruptors in there. You're still should be held accountable for that.
Yeah.
You can't say, well, we didn't know. You held a protest. You're asking people to join you. Well, maybe you shouldn't be, maybe it shouldn't be an open door policy, first of all.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Tom, because we just had this long sordid court case about the Freedom Convoy here in Ottawa, and that was the legal question they were trying to answer. How responsible are those original protest organizers for what ended up happening?
Well,
and they've been found guilty.
They should be held accountable because they're asking people to join. You're asking people to financially support you. And what was your agenda? They basically lied to say that they're only going to stay in Ottawa for 3 days. They wanted it to be 3 weeks. And whether you want to call it a peaceful or passive-aggressive protest, it disrupted the Ottawa for 3 weeks. Then it led to Canadian borders being shut down.
Yeah. So we're a little tight on time, Tom. Did you have a topic, a note on that other topic about a centrist political party?
I would really like a political party. It's one of your other callers who actually didn't really want to be left or right, to be down the center, that didn't have any alliances anywhere, because I don't believe the Conservatives always been are always the center. I don't believe the Liberals now are any better than they were. We have five. Well, we have Liberal, Conservative, NDP, which are supposed to be for the people. You have the Green, so you have four political parties, and we seem to be re-electing or recycling the same two political parties. Maybe it is really time for a change, for a new political party to come in and really be for the people. When Poilievre talks about certain things, he does bother me when he talks about things. Youngest politician to have a guaranteed pension. No one is going to have a $6,000 to $7,000 pension when they either retire from politics or get voted out of politics after 2 years. So when you've worked most of your life, or let's say 4 decades or 5 decades, we'll say 4 decades, and you've earned a certain amount of money, and you're being told that, you're getting $1,200 a month to survive on, and the cost of living's gone up, they've received 5 increases of salary increases. Yeah. And it's kind of hard to be sort of say, well, I don't think this is all fair. I would enjoy and listen to a new political party, providing they didn't have hidden agendas, but to actually work for the people, the taxpayer.
Okay. I got to run, Tom. Thank you for your call.
Thank you.
I'm David Smith, little over time. Everybody hang on. We have 2 full hours of Talkback. We'll get to all of your calls if you can be patient for us. 1-833-668-2577. This is News Radio.
Have something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talkback on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
David Smith here in for Rob today. Thank you for joining us. Couple of topics in the mix. Restricting protest. Municipalities in Ontario, a couple of them, have now taken the extraordinary step of implementing local bylaws that restrict where you are allowed to legally protest. It's in response to many protests over the last year that have ended up violent and have crossed the line into illegal actions. But a lot of concerns, especially from civil liberties types, about the slippery slope of government restricting protests. And do you feel like a political orphan? 43% of Canadians say the Liberals have moved to the left, 48% say the Conservatives have moved to the right, and 48% are most likely to agree none of the federal parties reflect their political views. What do you say? Back to the phones. Up next is Mel in Red Deer. Hi, Mel.
Hi. Good afternoon. I might be classified as an extremist, but I do believe that protests in Canada should only be in designated areas of each city, and that it only should be allowed if you're protesting something that's happening within our country to do with our government decisions.
Wow.
If anybody wants to protest that came here from another country, they should realize that Canada is a peaceful country. People want to live in peace and quiet. They should leave their problems at home and not bring their problems here to protest.
Okay. I mean,
And
it's
that
easier in principle than in practice, I think, for people to just leave generations of conflict behind. But I can hear what you're saying, I guess, Mel. Yeah.
And the Civil Liberties Association has gone so far left that this country is actually becoming more socialist than anything. But anyway, that's my opinion. And as far as another political party, all political parties for federal government in Canada should have to run a member in each riding in Canada. No regional parties. In Alberta here, I disagreed with the Wild Rose Party becoming a federal party because it's a regional party. I do not believe in regional parties, and I figure the Canadian government should somehow say, bring in the Elections Canada. Okay, if you want to be elected into a federal government, you have to run a member in every riding in Canada.
That would be some pretty aggressive electoral reform there, Mel. I don't know how far you could get with that one. Okay, I hear what you're saying, but on this idea of the middle, the center ground in Canadian politics, do you think that the parties are so far apart now on the left wing and the right wing that a centrist party would be good?
Some of the party members might be, but not all of them. Like in central Alberta here, our representatives that we have around the whole area are more center-leaning than any other party I've ever known. And like my ancestors came to Canada from northern England and southern Scotland 162 years ago. We came through Halifax when Canada wasn't even a country yet. And we didn't protest. I'm 75 years old, and when they decided to, protest the Vietnam War that Canada really wasn't involved in, well, that was problems coming from the United States. And protests, other than banning protests 100% for every reason, which might be the greatest thing to do, but, and as far as I'm concerned, the right to protest should not be allowed.
Wow. All right, Mel.
It should not be allowed.
All right. Well, thank you for the call today. We are looking for different perspectives. Thank you for that. I do very, very strongly disavow Mel's opinion there. The right to protest is pretty essential for any democracy, I think. There are many, many countries around the world where people do not have the right to protest, and that's a big part of why people leave those places and move to liberal democracies. 1-833-668-2577. I'm David Smith in for Rob Snow today. We'll stop here. More of your calls on the other side. Kyle and Listowel, hang on. We'll get to you before the top of the hour. Then we have a whole other hour on the other side to keep digging into this debate. Very much enjoying it so far. Let's keep it going here on News Radio.
Something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talkback on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
David Smith here in with you today. Rob will be back tomorrow. A couple minutes left here before the top of the hour for hour one of Talkback. We have a whole other hour after the top of the hour news. We have time for Kyle and Listowel now. Kyle and Listowel, you're on the air. Hello.
Hello. All right. So I have no problem with protesting. Obviously that's what our veterans and people that fought for our country wanted us to do. But I have a problem when you have bad apples or protesters destroying buildings, destroying pieces of property, burning of the Canadian flag. That's when I start to say, you know what? Maybe we need to start putting in some temporary restrictions on protesting. Just like you said, in front of religious places or things like that. And I will even extend it further to say, you know what? Maybe there needs to be a certain time when you're allowed to protest. Maybe like 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. or 6 p.m. or something, and say those are the times that you're allowed to protest. And then during the evening times and overnight, that's when protesting needs to stop. But that's where I start getting a little bit, I would say away from the protesting is when we start getting, like I said, the burning of the flag or destruction of buildings or things like that, personal property, things like that really push me away from the whole, letting you protest.
It's a tough one, and I'm not pretending that it's clear or simple or an easy equation to figure out. On the one hand, obviously, some of these protests, like that one in Vancouver where they burned the Canadian flag, it was totally beyond the pale. And people were arrested, and they have been charged with hate crimes now. But it's a tough thing for me to say we need to be proactive about preventing that protest, as bad as it was. Because the other half of the equation is you're then restricting everybody else's rights and freedoms.
But then what's the point of having our veterans and those people that fought for us to go and get killed to have our country that we are in, and then we have these bad apples that are doing what they're doing?
Yeah, it's a tough question. So you say...
You're right. Like, it's a tough thing.
Yeah.
Like, it's a double-edged sword, right? Like, you want to do one thing, but then you got to be careful on what you do to the other side of things,
Yeah.
So, but anyways, that's just my take on it there, my friend.
Thank you, Kyle. Thoughtful call today. Appreciate that. The police in Montreal say 800 people took part in this demonstration on Friday, and they believe 20 to 40 people committed all the crime. It's a tough one. We're back right after the news. More of your calls. This is Talkback. I'm David Smith on News Radio.
It's time to talk back.
On Now You Know with Rob Snow.
Call now.
And have your say.
1-833-668-2577.
It's David Smith here in for Rob Snow today. Thank you for joining us. Second hour of Talkback on News Radio. It's been very busy today. We do now have, for the first time, some lines available at 1-833-668-2577. 1-833-668-2577. I am here until the end of the hour. I'd love to hear from you. Should the government restrict protests in Canada to crack down on violence and public nuisance? Is that a slippery slope? I feel like it's a slippery slope. I've had some callers who think that we can explore that without being too restrictive on fundamental freedoms. Should the government really restrict where you can protest in Canada? And does Canada need a new centrist political party? 1-833-668-2577. Just a couple of the stories we can talk about today. Phone lines are open. Let's go to Eric, who's been kind enough to hang on through the news. Hello, Eric.
Hi, Dave. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing fine. What's your take today?
Well, I want to talk about the centrist party.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, you would have to define to me what policies the centrist party would have. Look, we either are on the left or on the right, and it used to be in this country until maybe the last 10 years that people would meet and have common ground. Instead of trying to have a full glass, they would be happy to have a half a glass, so society would function properly, and we wouldn't have all this divisiveness. The old saying is, when you're young, if you have a heart, you're a liberal, and when you're older, if you're a conservative. If you don't have any brains.
Yes. Yep.
So having a centrist party, that's almost like the only analogy I can draw. I don't want to say false equivalency because that doesn't really fit that in that context. But, if you have a car and it's a 4-speed, so do you make the decision, if you're going to keep it in first, that's what a person on the left would do. If you're going to put it in third, that's what a person on the right would do. If you stay neutral, how's the car going to progress? You know what I mean? So if you have a centrist party, where are the policies coming from?
Well, so Eric, if I could jump in.
Sure.
Some examples. So, for instance, the Liberal Party in Canada right now is pushing for universal pharmacare. Universal pharmacare for everybody, regardless of how much money you make. The Conservatives may cut the program, the start of the program that the Liberals have put in place. I happen to believe that Canada should have better publicly funded pharmacare, but I absolutely disagree with making it universal for each and every last person. I think it should be targeted and means tested. So that would be an example of a centrist policy. I think we should have public pharmacare coverage for people who need it, but it doesn't have to cost $100 billion or whatever and go out to every last person in Canada.
Okay. With all due respect, David, you just said the same thing that I said. If you had that one party portion a certain aspect of things, and the other party sees it in a bit of a different way, then you find neutral ground and you compromise. You're saying the same thing as I just said.
Yeah, but some people think that there's not enough compromise happening in Canada right now.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. So where does that how do you end up getting that common ground that we used to have years and years ago?
Well, the gentleman who has started this party thinks that you need a whole new political party that says we're not conservative or liberal, we're right in the middle.
Well, okay, we could talk back and forth about this all day.
Yeah.
The other thing, Dave, I want to talk about is the protesting.
Yeah.
I believe this. I believe people have a right to protest. But I don't think if people have the right to interfere with people going to worship or people going to school or people going to hospitals. I don't believe you have a right to interfere with other people's lives in terms of those things. If you want to protest and you want to make your point known and you're willing to stand outside in the cold and the rain and all that sort of thing and not cause any trouble, I think that's good. Unfortunately, that you're always going to have that fringe minority, anarchist, is the way I phrase them, that want to cause trouble. And the last thing, Dave, is if you come from another country, my mother came here on a boat from Ireland, right? So if you come from another country and you're back in your homeland, you have two ethnic groups that are having real problems with each other. Well, isn't the reason why you came to this country is so that you could get away from that? And if you're protesting what's going on in your own homeland, then maybe you should protest in front of embassies and not places of worship and stuff like that. I don't know if I articulated that.
No, I hear what you're saying. Yeah, I hear what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, Dave. Well, thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. Good to hear from you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye. That is a tough one. In our increase, I will say this, and I have a different perspective on this, I know, than people who are in older generations. There's definitely a generational divide on this. We've discussed this on this show in the past. In an increasingly global world, you just because you've moved to Canada doesn't mean that you give up your identity as being a member of the nation from where you originated. And that's not really a new thing. We've had dual citizenship, for example, in many countries for a long time. What we're seeing now, I think, just my own perspective, is that we are seeing more cultural conflicts appearing in Canada, manifesting in Canada, than we have been used to over the past couple of generations. I don't know if it's necessarily incumbent to people who move to Canada to not protest when they feel there is something worth protesting here in Canada. I don't think we can put that expectation on people. Just my own 2 cents on that side of the equation, that part of this debate, since a couple callers have brought it up. 1-833-668-2577. Again, the question today on protest, are you comfortable with municipal governments or governments of any stripe, really at any level, setting limits on where you can protest? I think it's unnecessary, but it would require better and more proactive enforcement by the police. And the police have become incredibly politicized themselves as an institution in recent years as well. Lots to chew on there. And this idea of a new centrist federal party is really interesting to me. I bring this up again because we have a brand new federal party incorporated in Canada. It's called the Canada Future Party. Its leader is a man named Dominic Carty. He's a veteran of New Brunswick politics. He was an NDP leader, and after that, a cabinet minister in a conservative government, if you can believe it. We'll talk about that a little more after the break. We have to stop here. Sean from Cambridge, I see you on the line. Hang on, we'll get to you in a few minutes. We have lines available. 1-833-668-2577. This is News Radio.
Have something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talkback on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
1-833-668-2577. It's David Smith here, in for Rob Snow today. Thank you for joining us. Talkback on News Radio. Yeah, this idea of a centrist federal political party is really interesting to me. There's a new party. It's called the Canada Future Party. From what I've read, it has about 100 members. They've just incorporated like 2 weeks ago. The leader of this new upstart party is a man named Dominic Carty. He's a veteran of New Brunswick politics. He was once the NDP leader in New Brunswick, the provincial party, before he went on to run successfully for the PCs, and he even held a cabinet position under Premier Blaine Higgs until recently. Now, Dominic Carty has launched his own federal party, and he tells the National Post it's about finding support in the middle of the political divide. Quote, "Success is 5 and then 10 years down the road. My country's still looking somewhat like it did, say, in 2014 or 15. A liberal, open, democratic society with rights protected despite the fact that the world has become ever more chaotic, difficult, and dangerous." End quote. That's the leader of this new centrist party. What do you think about that? Do you feel like a political orphan? Many people do. Many people do. They don't identify with the Conservatives or the Liberals or the NDP or the Green Party for that matter. 1-833-668-2577. Back to the phones. It's Sean in Cambridge. Hi, Sean.
Hi.
What's your take?
Yeah, I think we need a centrist party. I feel that the tone of the Conservatives has become too harsh, too far right wing, and I feel that the Liberals have gone too far left. I actually find myself missing the old PC party that we used to have federally.
Yeah. Yeah, you're in Cambridge, Sean. I mean, the PC party under Premier Ford here in Ontario, I wouldn't call Premier Ford all that conservative. They spend lots of money. He's a populist. He's kind of middle of the road, you know?
Yeah, he actually works with the federal government. Cooperation is a big thing.
So you'd like to see a PC type party a la Doug Ford's PCs in Ontario, but at the federal level. Left of Poilievre, but right of Justin Trudeau.
Yeah, I just find him, I just do not like his style. I find him too confrontational. He's just not cooperative enough.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a common complaint. It's a common criticism, I hear.
Can I make a comment on the protesting thing, too?
Yeah, sure.
Sure. I think we have enough laws about protesting. I think the police just need to enforce the laws. I do think, however, we need to look at foreign agents when we have foreign people coming in and agitating in Canada. It's not just maybe the Palestinians, but also like in the Ottawa protesters. When I saw those 4 horsemen carrying Trump signs at a Canadian protest, that really rubbed me the wrong way. And that's when they totally lost me.
Yeah. Yeah, I lived in the neighborhood when that happened. I saw those gentlemen with my own eyes on my walk to work, Sean. I agree with you on that one. All right, I have to jump for today. Thank you, Sean.
Goodbye.
That's Sean in Cambridge. I'm David Smith. Let's, we'll take one more before we stop here. It's going to be Herman in Calgary. Hi, Herman.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm fine. What's your opinion today?
Well, I was wanting to talk about protests, and, I agree with the last caller. We have laws. It's time to start enforcing them. So let's take a look at Friday night. I don't think that you could avoid the characterization of that protest as a riot. The Criminal Code of Canada provides pretty substantive penalties for wearing a mask or a disguise while participating.
Yes, yeah.
In a riot. So why didn't the Montreal police basically start rounding up everybody who was wearing a mask, arresting them, unmasking them, publishing the photos in the morning? I mean, I think it's to the point where we are too too soft. We are not actually letting people suffer the consequences for the actions that they take. And as a result, it's a form of collective punishment, because then we go to the next morning in Toronto and we see Ezra Levant arrested for videotaping another protest, again with another series of people with masks who are basically calling for the end of Canada, end of Israel, and that sort of stuff, all of which is, again, criminal code material. I think it's time that the police grow a backbone and a pair and start actually saying, this is how we're going to enforce it, and put the problem in front of the Crown and the courts. And then we can make an honest discussion in this country about, are we going to be the country of the rule of law, or are we just going to shove it under the carpet and pretend that these issues aren't important to Canadians? I believe they are.
Thank you for your call today, Herman. Great thoughts. Yeah, really agree with everything you've said there. I have to run for the break now. Yeah, again, in Montreal, I keep coming back to this statement that the Montreal police chief made to the media. 800 people. They had 800 people protesting. The police think they're going to end up arresting about 20 to 40. So 20 to 40 people in a crowd of 800. Does a carte blanche restriction on where you can protest address that? 1-833-668-2577. I'm David Smith. More calls coming up next. This is News Radio.
Have something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talkback on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
Should the government restrict where people are allowed to protest in response to violent protests that cross the line and become illegal? Are you in support of that? I have some concerns about it. Slippery slope and all that. And when it comes to Canada's federal political landscape, you know, there's an election around the corner in this country. Do you feel like a political orphan? Do you feel like none of these major parties represent your political views? 1-833-668-2577. Let's get back to the phones. Up next is John in Calgary. Hi, John.
Hi, David? Or
Yes, yeah, I've got you here, John. How are you?
good. I just want to talk about the protest.
Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I think let's say protest A against protest B. They should just go to the relevant, officers to do that instead of doing it in the public. That's my take of the situation.
Yes, but some people say, John, obviously that would be best. I think we can all agree on that. But should the government make rules for and restrict where you can have a protest because people are not respectful of each other?
Well, I mean, you have to be fair, right? When you see all these protests lately happenings across Canada, the country, they are disrupting the everyday life of the people who I'm sure knows what is happening, but whether they care or not, I mean, you know what I'm saying?
Well, a lot of them don't care. A lot of them will say our cause, and it doesn't matter the cause. Some of them will say our cause is more important than everything else going on in any of these people's lives, and if they're inconvenienced, we don't care.
Yeah, I know. But if you want to have a government to put in some kind of rules or laws, there will be more protests against that again. Guarantee.
Yeah, that's also fair. We'll start protesting the rules about protest. Yeah, okay.
I'm not saying about that. Yeah, they cannot protest, but just do it
respectfully.
How should I put it? Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Civilized way. I mean,
yeah.
I mean, we are lucky we can do that. I'm not trying to be how you say critical here, but yeah, there are countries where you cannot even do that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's a right that Canadians have fought and died for and continue to fight and die for. That's why I'm so uncomfortable with the idea of restricting it. All right, John.
I'm not saying we should restrict it. Go if you want to protest about this country, go to the embassy.
Go to the embassy. Yeah. Okay.
Go to the embassy or go to the relevant authority institution and do it.
Yeah. All right, John, thank you.
Thanks for taking my call.
Yeah, really interesting thoughts, John. Hope you call back sometime. Thank you.
See you, bye.
Got to run for the news here. 1-833-668-2577. Whole other half hour after the break. We can talk about restricting protests. Talk about this new centrist political party. Do we need another party at the federal level? Have we gotten so divided and conservatives and liberals are so far apart we need a whole new party in the middle? Coming up next, this is News Radio.
Have something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talkback on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
David Smith here, keeping you company today on the show. Thank you for joining us. Rob will be back tomorrow. Been having a very interesting discussion all day long with you about federal politics and about protesting and the fundamental freedom that we have to assemble in this country. Some politicians in Canada have taken the steps to begin rolling back that charter right. In Brampton and Vaughan, two major cities in Ontario, they have new bylaws now that restrict where you can hold a legal protest. Civil liberties groups don't like this. Some are even warning it won't withstand a charter challenge. Remains to be seen. What do you think about that? Obviously, nobody likes to see a protest that turns violent, but at the same time, it does happen. It is part of protesting. Sometimes groups with very strongly held opposing ideals will clash, and sometimes it becomes violent. This is not a new thing. This is not new in Canada in the year 2024, far from it. But we are having this conversation as a country about where your right to protest ends, about where your charter right starts to infringe on somebody else's charter right. 1-833-668-2577. On that theme, up next on the phone is Wade in Sylvan Lake. Hello, Wade.
Dave, how are you?
I'm fine. What's your take on that one?
Well, I don't think they should step in and restrict where people can protest. I personally think the protesters should grab a bit of a brain and have a little respect, especially when it comes to scaring children, for example.
Yeah.
And or families, for that matter. But one of your callers, I haven't listened to your whole show today. I was kind of busy, but one of your callers mentioned earlier about Ezra Levant being arrested in Toronto.
Yeah, he was arrested yesterday.
Yeah, I know, and David Menzies has been arrested in that same area a few times when these pro-Hamas demonstrators are chanting genocide and breaking every law in the criminal code when it comes to doing that, and the police arrest the journalists. I mean, that's just that's bizarre.
It doesn't make any sense, right?
No.
It doesn't make any sense.
That's right, but it's really, I don't believe it's the police. They're getting their marching orders from probably the mayor, who's getting her marching orders probably from Tyrant Trudeau, because he absolutely hates Rebel News. He won't even recognize them as journalists, and that's not right.
Okay.
And as far as the center thing, I don't know if you would call me a center or what I am, but I just, for example, what happened in BC when they had their election and those two parties were so close to winning, okay, let's just stop here a minute. We'll take some of your good ideas, we'll take some of my good ideas, and we'll put them together, and let's do something good for the people.
Right. But, not necessarily need to create a whole new party to do that. Existing leaders could do that, right?
Definitely not.
Right.
But when you see, the few times that I watch the Parliament in Ottawa, it seems like you've got Trudeau and Poilievre standing on either side of the aisle, and they're yelling at each other over the same thing time after time after time after time. Like, It seems like it's the same thing.
Yeah,
Every time I watch them.
it's a bit of a clown show in Ottawa right now, if you want my own opinion. I got to run here, Wade. Yeah, thank you for the call. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's Wade and Sylvan Lake. Yeah, Mr. Trudeau and Mr. Poilievre, it's personal for those guys. It's professional. Their job is to try and win an election and beat the other guy, but make no mistake, it's personal between those two as well. They really don't like each other. Does Canada need a new middle-of-the-road party, though? Like a whole new party? And to Wade's point, I can kind of get on side with Wade's way of thinking there. You know, these three parties that we have at the federal level, three main ones, there was a time where that was working for Canadians. Doesn't seem to be working for Canadians anymore. 1-833-668-2577. Callers on the line want to talk about restricting protest. Let's get back to that topic here with Hakeem in Calgary. Hi, Hakeem.
Hi, Dave. Thanks for taking my call. I just want to speak my mind here.
Please, yes.
Yeah, man. All Canadians have the right to protest against anything they don't like. I mean, it's their right to protest anywhere, anytime. Now, the government, especially the municipalities, police, whatever the city, they have their duty, their job is to designate a special place for them, like not special time, but the place, the time, and their safety. And I kind of like, I disagree with anyone who said, no, you cannot protest because it's going to bring a lot of chaos, like what happened in Montreal. Well, man, look, all over the globe, all over the news, there is no, I mean, there is always some people they're trying to make chaos, but man, the police are their job. They're paid to monitor those protests. If you are against Israelis, what's going on in Gaza, or against Trudeau, or against whatever, you have the right. Even if you are one person, you have the right to protest. And you know what I'm saying? To protest and make your voice heard. And this is part of democracy. If we strict that, my friend, I'm telling you, we're going to lose a lot. We're going to let people to protest if it's positive or negative, but they are police, undercover police, whatever, CSIS, whatever. Their job is to monitor. It's to make sure other people are safe.
Yeah.
It's part of the game. It's part of democracy. You like it or not.
Yes.
We have to keep it this way,
yes.
in my opinion. And I don't know. That's my thought, my friend.
Yeah, very well said, Hakeem. Thank you for those thoughts. I appreciate
much,
that.
Friend.
Yeah,
Thanks.
take care. Certain things ought not be restricted. I think that's what Hakeem is getting at. Fundamental freedoms, to whatever extent we can maintain them fundamentally, should be beyond reproach. I recognize that practically in a democracy, it's not perfect democracy. Of course it's not. And this is one of those things where sometimes what a democracy is can become self-contradictory at times when you have people's charter rights bumping up against each other. It's a heady topic, I know. Lots of you have very interesting thoughts on it, though. We'll keep going with the calls here in a few moments. I'm David Smith. This is Talkback on Now You Know. I'm in for Rob Snow today. We'll be back in a couple of minutes. More of your phone calls. We're here until the top of the hour. This is News Radio.
Have something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talkback on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
It's David Smith here in for Rob Snow today. Does Canada need a new middle-of-the-road political party? One of the most common criticism pundits and callers to this show have laid on the Trudeau Liberals in recent years is that they've taken the party, the Liberal Party of Canada, way too far to the left. There's practically no daylight between the Trudeau Liberals and the federal NDP anymore. They're all way out there on the left wing. And that's left all this room in the center open to conservatives who are leading the fight for middle-class votes in every age demographic right now. At the same time, Pierre Poilievre remains an unpopular leader. He is, really. He is quite unpopular. The Conservative Party is very popular. Pierre Poilievre himself, not so much. More than half of Canadians say they don't like the guy. 52% have a negative view of him. Only 36% of people say they like him. And my opinion as to why that is, it's because of his tone. It's because of his tone. He's got a very harsh tone. He's very blunt. He's not concerned with saying the right things or sounding the right way. Some people like that. And I don't blame you if you like that. That's fine. It's a turnoff for others. I know that. I know it's also a turnoff for others. Let's face it. For voters of a certain age, Poilievre's history is not one of amicable leadership. His career up until a couple years ago was defined as being a vicious, partisan, conservative attack dog. And that's, I think, why he's been so successful as leader of that party. I think that party needed that. Just calling a spade a spade. But I'm not going to say you're right or wrong if you really like or really don't like Pierre Poilievre. He's a polarizing guy. But the reason I bring all this up is because I think there might be something behind this idea of a new centrist political party in Canada. 1-833-668-2577. Up next is Andrew in Calgary. Hi, Andrew.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. What's your take on that one?
I think that another party is absolutely necessary. I feel too many people are feeling politically homeless. You just said that Poilievre is a polarizing guy. So is Trudeau, and I think that that's a terrible, terrible way for any of the major party leaders to be. They should be able to represent all Canadians, regardless if they voted for them or not. We shouldn't have so much division, and I think a way to do that would be to have another party in there that can actually support a different demographic of just the left or the right. And I think that it would cause more need for coalition governments or supplying confidence in governments, but that's not necessarily a bad thing in all areas. I know it hasn't really been everybody's favorite over the last few years, but I think that there's lots of times where that could be beneficial, as it requires the leaders or the parties to take more than just their base in account when they're making policy decisions. Yeah, and I had some stats earlier in the show, Andrew. There's about 35% of people, when you ask them, they feel like that. The word that the pollster Angus Reid used was political orphan. Political orphan. You don't feel like you have a home. Sounds like you relate to that. I am a political orphan. I identify. I don't know who my parents are anymore. All right. Interesting thoughts today, Andrew. Thank you for the call. I appreciate that. Yeah, thank you for listening. Take care. That's Andrew in Calgary. Interesting. All right. We'll take one more before we stop here. We are starting to run out of time, so let's get to it. Robert in Calgary. I think you want to talk about restricting protest. Robert.
Hello. I keep hearing people saying we have an unfettered right to protest. That is essentially true, but I haven't seen evidence that there have been prosecutions of people for protesting. We have laws in this country that restrict the blockages of highways, the blockages of main streets, and I don't believe your right to protest trumps those laws. You can hold the protest without doing that. And all the prosecutions I have seen have been related to those kind of events. It's, the Coots border crossing, the Montreal streets, or the Ottawa streets. Yeah. Those were over crossing other laws while protesting. They were not prosecutions about the protests themselves. Yeah. So I think we already have restrictions on where you can protest, which is very different than a restriction on whether you can protest. Yeah, and to that end, my position on that issue, which I voiced earlier in the show, is that we already have laws to place reasonable restrictions on that charter right,
and the way that they're being applied and enforced is insufficient. I don't think we need new laws. I think we need to enforce the laws that we currently have.
Well, I think we are enforcing them, actually. The prosecutions have occurred on those bases.
Right. Right. Well, there's a feeling. I just say that because, the debate has arisen as a result of people feeling like there hasn't been adequate enforcement. But it sounds like you're not even all the way there yet on that one.
Yeah, I've seen enforcement. I can agree with you, not adequate, but I don't know how far you can go with that either. It has to be reasonable on both sides.
Yeah. All right, Robert, thank you for weighing in on that for me. Really appreciate it. All right, we have to stop. We'll try and fit in a couple more calls on the other side. I'm David Smith. This is Talkback. You're listening to News Radio.
Have something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talkback on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
It's David Smith here in for Rob today, winding down Talkback on this Monday. Great discussion on the show today. Thank you for all of your calls. Time to take one more here. It's Tim who has called in from Alberta today. Hello, Tim.
Hi, well, how are you?
I'm good. What's your opinion today?
Well, first off, on the riots or protesting, I guess, all the scenes you see on TV and social media, that's not protesting. They're smashing windows, they're lighting cars on fire. But not one of those videos you see a police officer anywhere. So the right to protest, I think, is protest. I mean, no, we shouldn't restrict that one more. Like we don't need to restrict protest if you're actually protesting. Smashing windows, lighting cars on fire is not protesting. That's just being violent and destructive, which doesn't help the protest, doesn't help anything. So where are police? Why are they not arresting all those? There's more than 20 people smashing windows and lighting cars on fire, but not one police on the scene in any of those videos. Now, that's social media. You never see. Exactly
that's fair.
On.
That's fair. Yeah.
But I mean, where are they? Why are they not enforcing the law? Why are they not?
Well, I will say
that
this.
Was a shooting.
Yeah, I will say this. I mean, the Montreal police, they did arrest 3 people on Friday night, and the police chief says they fully expect more arrests will come out. They review the video, they work with the RCMP to confirm people's identities, and then more arrests will happen. That's what they say. That's their approach.
Yes, but I mean, they, 3 people on Friday night when there was, more than 50 doing the damage.
It's right there on video. A lot more than 3 people smashing windows. I don't know why they only managed to arrest 3, but.
Exactly. That's the point. And that's any of the protests where it turns violent. I mean, if you want to fight with the people you're protesting with, go ahead, knock yourself out, beat the crap out of each other, go to court for, assault, whatever. But there's no protesting, breaking windows and smashing vehicles. I mean, whether it's private property, public property, whatever, that's not protesting. That's just being destructive.
Yeah.
In my opinion. But anyways.
Alrighty.
And
we're just about out of time here, Tim. I've only got 30 seconds left. Okay. So I'm gonna let you go for today. But thank you for the call.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Take care. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
I just don't want to get into the other topic and then have to cut him off here. And in just a few seconds, we're winding it down for today. Interesting thoughts from Tim there. And again, I would broadly agree with what Tim is saying. In theory, we have laws against hate speech. We have laws against arson and property damage. We have laws against blocking roadways. In theory, law enforcement have the tools to shut down a protest if it crosses the line into illegal activity. In theory. In practice, that can be complicated. And in practice, law enforcement will often take a hands-off approach by default. Because we're talking about a fundamental freedom here. It's protected in the Charter for a reason. It can be a slippery slope. Thank you for all those calls today. I'm David Smith. This is News Radio.